The family's first TV sparked his imagination.
What I remember about it was that it was magic.
And started him on a lifelong journey. He got his first job at an Omaha TV station. That's where he was the day President Kennedy was assassinated.
And I ran down and took this copy and went on the air.
For almost 40 years, he's been on the air for NBC News, bringing the nation the news of a generation. From stories of war.
Good evening once again from Saudi Arabia.
To stories of peace.
Good evening, live from the Berlin Wall.
He's introduced us to the powerful.
I went to Moscow to interview Mikhail Gorbachev.
And the powerless.
These young people were beginning another daily struggle for survival.
There, when the world faced change.
I rode my bicycle into Tiananmen Square.
And the nation faced challenges.
Their spirit will live on.
In dark times.
I remember thinking, don't lose control.
And hopeful moments.
This has been a great day. It's been a great American century.
His stories, our stories.
I could not have imagined that I would get to as many places as I have.
Tonight, celebrating a remarkable career in journalism. From a Nebraska newsroom to the White House to every hot spot around the world. Tom Brokaw, eyewitness to history.
Good evening from Studio 8H here at NBC. In 1960, Chet Huntley, David Brinkley, and the NBC News team reported the election results from this historic studio. And I was a 20-year-old watching from my parents' living room in South Dakota. I stayed up through the night, and by morning I thought, that's what I'd like to do, become a network correspondent. It was the first step on a long road that took me to far-off places and through monumental changes in the world, many with terrible consequences. Other changes have been more gradual and a great deal more welcome. Tonight, I invite you to join me on a trip through our common past. We may not see everything through the same prism, but somehow we got to this place together. For me, the assassination of John F. Kennedy ended an age of innocence. So to begin this journey of reflection, I went back to the familiar banks of the Missouri River to recall how his death led to a series of events and a year in which the world seemed to come apart. "1968 will always be for me at once a big blur, but in my own mind, a year in bold print. I was a young father and a young professional trying to make my way through NBC. The culture was changing. The world that I had known really began to fly apart. The pieces just kept flying off the globe.
United States Command announced today that yesterday's raids against the South Vietnamese Panhandle were the heaviest of the war.
The war was at a very bad place in Vietnam. Well, the great impact of the Tet Offensive was the audacity of it. At a time when the administration was trying to assure the American people we were winning the war in Vietnam, they strike in the heart of the capital.
It was suddenly awakened by a very loud explosion. The embassy was being attacked. I could hear the machine gun and rocket fire. It was a really awful scene.
Dead faces, just these very young faces.
Psychologically, they did an enormous amount of damage. What they did had an electrifying effect on this country. People had much deeper doubts about the war and what the chances were of winning it. And it had a kind of chain reaction effect.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
I was in the control room at NBC Studios in Burbank when he made that announcement, and it was stunning. Of all the political events that I've been witness to, I think it's one of the 3 or 4 most memorable.
Everything was in play at that point.
Thank you.
Everything was up for grabs. Hubert Humphrey, one of the most familiar figures in American politics, he got involved. And from the South, George Wallace, the symbol of resistance to racial change in America. And who was this man, Gene McCarthy, who was a poet and a philosopher in his soul? Would the Kennedy dynasty rise again?
Senator Robert Kennedy brought his presidential campaign to Southern California today.
Give me your help.
I have some very sad news for all of you. Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
Shot in the face as he stood alone on the balcony of his hotel room.
Kapow! The shot rang out. I rushed to his side. There was a gaping hole in the right side of his face. I took a spread and covered him from his neck down. He never spoke a word.
For him to be shot down in that way in Memphis was so appalling.
The police were coming, and I hollered to them, "Call an ambulance on your police radio. Dr. King has been shot." And they said, "Where did the shot come from?" And there's a famous picture of people pointing in the direction of the rooming house across the street.
The FBI has pinned down the identification of the man suspected of killing Dr. Martin Luther King.
The cities began to go up all across the country.
Here is a guy who's a peacemaker, and violence erupts in the aftermath of his death. Bloodshed, arson, looting. Just understandable, but wrong behavior.
When Dr. King was killed, it traumatized this country, and we were still in the spring of that year. Bobby Kennedy wins the primary, makes that memorable speech that night at the Ambassador Hotel.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
And within moments, he had been shot in the head.
Oh, my God. Senator Kennedy has been shot.
I was a busboy at the Ambassador Hotel the night that Bobby Kennedy got shot. I could feel the warm blood just run through my fingers. So I started yelling for a doctor.
Please stay back. Everybody else, just please stay back. Just a doctor.
I was the first to the gun. I got to the gun, and I put my hand on the gun hand. People started to kick Sirhan, and they were stomping on him, and I just think I was numb.
Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today.
It was a tough time. You wondered who we were, that we could have that much hate and that much violence ingrained in our lives.
The whole world is watching, chants the crowd on the side.
My job at the 1968 Democratic Convention was to keep track of the California delegation. And night after night in the streets, the protesters and the cops were going after each other.
We wanted to put forward on the streets the strongest resistance possible to Lyndon Johnson's war in Vietnam.
The police were edgy, the National Guard was edgy, the demonstrators were edgy. The police, they were in a blood frenzy. That's the only way I could describe it. They started shooting tear gas. I was saying, press, and flashing my press card. And that seemed to aggravate them even further, clubbing me and pushing me into a plate glass.
So you were demonstrating today?
No, I was down merely to observe, trying to get a color story for a paper.
There's just no question that the Chicago police lost control. On the other hand, the rage and the anger on the part of a lot of the demonstrators was so palpable. They wanted to provoke the police in that way. They wanted to create anarchy in the streets.
It became a so-called police riot, but in my own heart, I know we didn't riot. Sometimes when someone gets right in your face and wants to punch you, then you're going to punch back. There was no malice. Nobody went out to kill anybody, and nobody got killed.
I remember walking down one night between a column of National Guardsmen and demonstrators 4 feet away from them, all the same age, And I thought, I am walking down through the division line of America. How